We are recording too. Hello, Meredith. Hello, Christina.
Hello, Julie. Hello, Christina.
Hi.
Welcome to Virtual Warwicks.
Thank you very much.
Meredith, it's wonderful having you. Christina, I feel like we said in the green room, we are like old friends on this.
We've had some really fun hours.
We've had some great hours, and you have been so generous with your time, and we so appreciate it. And I know it's going to be another wonderful conversation. So thank you for coming in with us again.
I'm so
Great. So just real quick, I'm going to just fill a little bit of time to give Facebook a minute or two to notify people that we're live and that we're here. So Meredith, I think in the green room, you said you're calling in from Berkeley. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm in Berkeley. I live in Maine most of the year, but I do spend time in Berkeley, and I'm there right now. You might see this sort of California light around me on this Zoom.
Yeah.
And so but speaking of Maine, so that's what you and Christina, you're calling in from Maine. Is that correct?
I'm calling in from Maine. This has been my sort of my command central while I've been here. I'm going back to New York on Saturday, kind of nervously, but
is that the first time you've been back?
18 months. We've been here for 18 months.
Wow.
We sold a house. We bought a house. We're very settled here, and now we're going to go back. So we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's quite to not go back at all. That's going to be something next weekend.
It's been such a crazy time, as you know.
Yeah. Everybody. Okay. Just so we've got the coast covered. Hopefully we've got some people calling in from in between. For those of you that are tuning in that might not know what Warwick's is, we're, my little sign there says 1896. While we're not the oldest bookstore in the country, we are the oldest continuously family owned. We're celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. So we've got some great things coming. So if you're not on our email list, you might want to do that. We have some fun contests and way to win some gift certificates from us coming in November. So go to our website and check out our email list if you would like to be involved in any of that. We're located in La Jolla, San Diego, California. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be putting in Meredith's wonderful book, Beneficence. Oh my God, I can't wait for this conversation. I loved this book so much, and I can't wait for all of you. I'm going to put a link into the comment section so you can easily click on that. They'll be available to you. We'll be shipping them out next week. So go ahead and you can click on it to either pick it up at the store, which we'd love for you to come by the store and pick up the book, and you can see other things at Christina's books and all kinds of other things there. Or if you want it shipped to you, we ship all over the country, so it's easy to do that as well. In that comment section too, we would love audience questions. If you're watching this on YouTube later, sorry, we're not live with you. But it's a great conversation, so stay tuned and watch it. But for everybody that's on Facebook, go ahead and put those questions into the comment section. We love audience questions, so I'll feed those into Christina and Meredith's conversation. They'll chat for about 35 minutes, but if we've got some questions, go ahead and put those in live too. So with that, I think I've done my housekeeping. I'm going to introduce you to, and then I'm going to pop off the screen. So Meredith Hall's memoir, Without a Map, is a classic of the genre and a New York Times bestseller. It was named Best Book of the Year by Kirkus and BookSense, as well as Elle's Reader's Pick of the Year. Her work has appeared in 5 Points, the Gettysburg Review, the Kenyon Review, the Southern Review, the New York Times, and many others. Meredith divides her time, like we said, between Maine and California. And as I mentioned, she's here today to talk to us about, just out in paperback, Beneficence. Oh, can't wait for everybody to read this. And of course, joining her today is our wonderful Christina Baker Kline. As a #1 New York Times bestselling author of 8 novels, including The Exiles, Orphan Train, and A Piece of the World, Christina is published in 40 countries. Her novels have been awarded the New England Prize for Fiction, the Maine Literary Award, and a Barnes & Noble Discover Award, among other accolades, and have been chosen by hundreds of communities, universities, and schools as One Book, One Read selections. Her essays, articles, and reviews have appeared in publications such as the New York Times and the New York Times Book Review, the Boston Globe, and many others as well. Born in England and raised in the American South and Maine, she lives in New York City, well, going back after 18 months, and on Mount Desert Island on Maine. So, ladies, have a great conversation. Can't wait. See you in a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Yes, thank you, Julie. I'm a huge fan of Warwick's, as you know, and I can't wait to come in person one of these days. Meredith, I am so honored to be here with you. I don't know if you know the story, but your editor at Godine, which by the way is my new favorite publisher.
I agree.
Yes, Josh Bodwell, who ran the Maine Writers and Publishers Association beautifully for years, and we became friends, sent me your novel, and I had heard of your memoir, but I hadn't read it, so I was intrigued. But from the first page, I was captivated, and I think I even texted him before I was far into the book saying, this is a real treat. And the readers or the listeners today are in for a huge treat. If you haven't read it yet, you may, if you've read it, it would be in this form, which is the hardcover, which by the way, I think is gorgeous. But I love the sort of accessibility and beauty of this paperback. There's my quote. And I think they did a really beautiful job. And this publisher, by the way, for those of you out there who are writing books, I think Godine is one of the top places in the United States these days publishing literary fiction. And I'm thrilled that they published your book. So Meredith, stepping back, welcome. And tell us what Beneficence is about.
Beneficence is a story about a family on a Maine dairy farm. The story opens in the late 1940s when the farms in Maine were still, the family farms were still doing quite well. This farm had been in Top Center, the father and husband of this story. It had been in his family for 5 generations. There are 5 members of the family: Doris, his wife, and the mother, and 3 children: Sonny, Dodie, the middle child, who's a girl, and Beston, a little boy. And the story is about the ways in which a family that is very well integrated into their life on the farm, and as a family within their family life, they share not only a lot of love between them, but they enjoy each other, they like each other, and their life together, the work of the farm and the great beauty of the farm binds them. And then a tragedy hits this family. And I wanted to watch what happens when a family careens into a desperate kind of grief and loss, and how do we find our way back? I believe we do. It is the human story that we find our way back to a sense of the justness of the world and the goodness and beauty of the world, and trusting again in love when maybe that trust, the belief in that love, has been shattered. These people, both of these parents, make very poor decisions at different times as they respond to this grief. And so the book watches this kind of wobbling response over a period of time, and then the ways in which they actually find that path back into beneficence, back into a sense of the goodness and a trust in their relationship, trust in what holds them together as a family.
Before we came live on Facebook, we were talking about how while you're writing about grief, it's ultimately such a soulful and satisfying book. It's not depressing. It's not actually dark. You've got so much sort of philosophical meat in it about the way we live and the way we every single person encounters grief at some point.
Yes.
And I think I was probably telling your editor, I don't even know, maybe I wrote this in my blurb, I'm not sure, but that when I read it, I was brought back to 2 books I absolutely love: 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley and A Map of the World by Jane Hamilton. I don't know if you've read.
Yes, both books, yes.
You know, those books are on my short shelf, as now Beneficence is too, because both of them address what it means to be human in a way that your book does.
Yes, I was concerned about this book being dark, especially coming out during the pandemic. And I thought, well, readers really want to find their way to a dark story. And I am hearing from people that they do not sense the darkness of this book, but instead there is you know, the land, this very, very beautiful farm on this beautiful land, and its productivity, and the trust that this family has, that the work that they bring to that land is reciprocated by the bounty of the land back to them. And all of these rhythms and the beauty of that beauty just never leaves them. And I think both the work and that beauty are part of what sustains them. I also think that they are very much like us. I think that you're right. It's an astonishing thing that all of us, many times in our lives, experience loss and grief. And yet it's not something that we talk about as one of the central experiences. It is. And we don't talk about it.
I think for many people, it's so painful that
Yes.
it's hard to process. And what your novel does so beautifully is to express articulately feelings, deep feelings that people have that they might not know how to express or may have never said even to anyone. And to me, that's what literature can do at its best, and what fiction can do at its best, is to open a door into a level of experience, of emotion that, you know, all of us might intuit on some level, but not ever be able to access. So my question for you out of that is, it's hard to access that level of sort of philosophical inquiry and also dwelling in moments of pain or sadness. And how did you do that?
Well, I think it was for me too. You know, if we, as we live our daily lives, if we if these experiences don't really have a vocabulary for us, I didn't own that vocabulary as I started writing this book, and it really was a process of exploration for me. I found that I came to experience the depth of this loss in a very personal way. I love these people, I love these characters very deeply, and love their farm. I felt as if I had lived on this farm with these people. And so the loss was really, really wrenching. It was a very, very difficult time in the writing, but that carries for such a short period in the book. And then we start that process of looking at what this loss means and how we're going to make our way through it. And that's when I was really able to kick in as a writer and do that exploring. You know, once I stated the loss, now where do we go? And where we went was of great interest to me. It was really a process of making ground as these people did themselves.
Well, this might be a good moment for you to read just a couple of pages. Give us a little taste of the story. Because there's a quote that I love from the book that has the title in it. I don't know if that's the section you're going to read, but if maybe I'll read that after, you know.
Okay, all right. I'm not sure. You know, when I titled this book, Josh Bodwell, my brilliant and wonderful editor at Godine, we talked at length about the title, and he really favored beneficence. And I thought, well, you know, this is, you know, it's a big word. Is this really what we want? When I was doing the reading through for the copy edits, I was shocked to discover that I used the word beneficence in this book 4 times. So clearly it's a concept that is very important to me. So I thought I would move ahead in the book. I mentioned that these parents both make some decisions that really leave their children high and dry in many ways. They leave their children to themselves for a fairly long period of time. They're there physically, but they are not there emotionally. And I thought I would read farther along in the book. This is a moment that captures one of those beginning steps as Top and his wife start finding their way. They start discovering small ways to move back toward each other. Dodie is getting married. So she was about 10 when this event happened, and now she's getting married. And this is at the wedding. It's just family outside at the farm. And this is, as I said, this is a very early moment in that sort of reconciliation. This is in Tup's voice. The book is written in 3 voices: Doris, the child Dodie, and who is getting married in this scene, and Tup. And we hear those 3 voices in rounds throughout the book. So this is Tup speaking. Doris moved to Dodie's side as Daniel walked across the yard toward his bride, and Doris reached for her daughter's hand, and Dodie did not balk, which I would have understood, but she did not. And they stood side by side, mother and daughter, holding hands until Daniel came beside her, and then it was his hand she held, and Doris moved to my side. I will remember the soft summer air and warm sun with its deep palliative shadows, the cows at a distance in the west pasture on the heavy green grass, and Dodie beautiful in her white dress. I will remember Daniel's fullness, excuse me, with happiness, and Dodie's and Beston's music coming over the yard with its free and unbounded promise. Mostly I will remember my wife coming into the world, reaching for her daughter and spending love. Doris's hair has grayed, but still in the brightness of the summer sun, it shone golden down her back. We stood side by side, and then I gave our daughter over into marriage. Afterward, we ate in the cool shade of the porch, Marion staying and Beston continuing with his music from the front room, the piano and his low, soft voice apart from us. Doris had risen to the occasion and made quite a feast of salads and breads and a big sheet of cake, and she served each of us carefully, the table covered with the white cloth she used to bring out on holidays. Dodie had washed and ironed and rehemmed her mother's good blue dress, and she had pinned a white rose at her shoulder. Doris looked beautiful, the wear of these 7 years gone on this day of ceremony. I have not seen my wife relieved of her grief in all this time. I felt the day of our own marriage powerfully, and moved through the afternoon, belonging in both times, my wife and my daughter, each on their wedding days, and alleviation of my own encumbrances.
Lovely, elegiac, incorporating the future and the past, and his voice is so distinctive, I think, in the book. What was it like for you writing in these different perspectives? How did you differentiate between the characters?
This is my first novel. I think had anybody given me any advice, they would have told me not to try this, but I didn't know enough not to. And I thought initially that this would be told all in the present moment, looking back in Tup's voice. I thought it would be first person, but it would be Tup telling this story. And when I sat down to write, I really was shocked. I didn't even know his wife's name. I hadn't gotten that far when I started writing. And I was shocked that the first thing that came to the page was this woman named Doris who wanted to talk. And she started off the book giving us the history of this farm and giving us a sense of this very, very close and loving family in this beautiful place, and also a sense of the deep love that she and her husband shared. And so once Doris spoke, and I knew Tup was going to speak, I thought, you know, I don't want this just 2 voices back and forth. And I decided to allow this daughter, Dodie, that Doris had mentioned. I thought that she might have a voice. And she turned out to be actually one of my most fun, most interesting characters to write. She is a very, very remarkable young girl. And she always surprised me. She pushed her parents hard with truths. She was a truth teller. Mm-hmm. And she was a great joy to write.
How did you make the decision to do those 3 voices and not one of the other 2 voices of the family members?
I think I was attracted to that middle child, the girl, the others are boys. And I considered Beston the youngest child, but he was really such a small child. I decided 2 things. One was that when the book opened, he was just too young to really add his voice to this. And also 4 characters is a lot. I thought, even as a new writer, I figured that 3 was plenty on my plate. So I stopped.
Yeah, 3 is plenty to take on. So you talked about being a debut novelist.
Yes.
My friend Robin Black, who's a wonderful novelist and wrote a terrific novel called Life Drawing, has written essays about becoming a novelist at a mature age.
Yes.
And what has that experience been like for you? You know, how did you decide to write a novel? Did you always want to do it? You obviously had written memoir and had quite successfully could have done that again. What drew you to write a novel?
Well, I think, you know, I taught writing in the MFA program at the University of New Hampshire for many years and considered my identity was teacher. I considered myself a teacher of writing and a mentor of writers. And when I was in my mid or even later 50s, a colleague kind of taunted me and said, you know, you do all this teaching and your students love you. What about you doing some writing? And I decided that I would actually try it. And the first 2 essays I wrote, memoir essays, were picked up immediately and had great success. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll write a book. I applied for a very wonderful grant that supported me for 2 years. I did it very audaciously and very silently. I thought I had no chance whatsoever of winning this grant, and I did. And so I was given 2 years off from my teaching, and I wrote this memoir. And after that memoir, I thought that nobody would ever read it. I thought nobody would ever know about this little book by this little writer.
And in the process of talking about this, can I just ask you quickly, how long did the memoir take, and what was that writing process like for you?
I closed up my house in Maine and moved to a little sublet in San Francisco and wrote this book, the memoir, in 5 months. It was done. These were stories waiting to be told. I realized these were very intimate stories about an event. I got pregnant when I was 16 years old in a small town in New Hampshire in 1965. And the ramifications of that pregnancy were really, really pretty dramatic. And I had been sworn to secrecy, and I had carried those secrets until I decided to sit down and tell other people about it. Once I decided to speak them, I told the story to a lot of people. I actually, as I wrote very intimately because I didn't think that it would ever be published. And it was published, and it hit the New York Times bestseller list. And I ended up moving around with the book around the country, talking about these, you know, with memoir, you're not just talking about the book, you're talking about your life. And
yeah, exactly.
I came out of that experience and said, I consider myself an essayist. I know the essay, I've taught the essay for many years, but I need to switch over to fiction. I'm not going to do this again. And I felt that I couldn't afford that intimacy. And yet something that's really strange is that I feel far more exposed in this novel than I do in my memoir. The writing was so close to the bone for me in ways that I did not understand at the time that I was writing it, that this is really a kind of unzippering and an invitation, walk right in here and look around, because this is me. So
can you talk a little bit more about that? So I have a friend who wrote a memoir that did very well about growing up in foster care, her life. But she recently wrote an essay for the New York, for Modern Love column, and she realized that she hadn't gotten at the deepest stuff.
Yes.
And she may write another. And I wonder, what was it that felt so exposing to you about the novel?
I think the losses, that child that I had when I was 16 was given up for adoption. And I think that I never understood the ways in which that loss, I never allowed myself to name that loss in the way that we can name the loss of a child in another circumstance. And I think that I was unaware as I wrote this book. I was very aware that I was deeply, deeply engaged emotionally, that it was a costly writing. It really was a very costly writing, but I didn't understand why. I thought it was because I love these people so much, as writers do. These characters were so alive and so real to me, so fully imagined, that they were my family for the time that I was in this book. And I thought that's what was going on. But I think actually that I was in many ways retelling this story in a much more visceral way. And I think it's good for the book that I didn't understand that at the time I was writing it.
Well, I think that's true a lot of times when you write fiction, that you're writing as a way of knowing.
Yes.
That you're working toward understanding, but you're right that if you lay it all bare or outline, exactly where it comes from, it's never going to have that kind of.
No, if you have the awareness that it's actually coming from your own story, I think that it really creates some significant problems for fiction.
Yeah. So have you taught fiction writing as well?
I have taught many fiction writers. So as I taught memoir, really what I taught was narrative storytelling. And I had many fiction writers in the MFA program come and study with me, because I really focused on what the art is of narrative writing. And I felt that in memoir or in fiction, this is the essential tool that a writer needs. And so I did get to work with fiction writers a lot and loved it. Learned a lot from them, actually.
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
What can you say one thing that you learned, or two?
Well, maybe one of them is that autobiography masked as fiction is not successful. I saw that a lot of younger writers are uncomfortable telling their own story, and so they try to mask it. I think that one of the biggest things, as I encouraged both nonfiction and fiction narrative writers to really move so profoundly, so deeply into their material that they imagine it in almost a wild way. The imagination needs to be pretty wild and reckless, and needs to be unfettered. And in observing that in these young writers' work, and then bringing those observations to my own, I think that I was allowed to discover the absolute joy of following your imagination and getting it on the page.
And so how do you do that? Do you write quickly? How do you banish the editor from your head as you're working?
Yeah, I don't seem to have an editor in my head. I'm not a drafter. I don't make multiple drafts. I think my process is, I work slowly. I work on a word processor. I don't write by hand, and am grateful for that word processor. I write slowly, word by word. I listen to Gregorian chants. I have a writing space that is pretty sacred. It's a sacrosanct space in my house, and nothing happens at that desk. Nothing happens in that room except that creative work. And I go in and sit down, close the door, and put on Gregorian chants, and I am gone.
You're just there.
Gone. Just move into some other world. And I do write slowly. I go back over phrases and sentences. I might go back into a previous paragraph, but I really don't go back and rewrite. I'm in that moment, in that place. And I always leave my work mid-paragraph, and know in the morning when I return to it, I know exactly where I am. I don't need to work off any rust that built up overnight. I'm there. And on go the Gregorian chants, and I disappear again. And
is that true for both of these books, that you have Gregorian chants?
Yes. Yeah.
What do you think it is about that music that is inspiring for you?
I think that it is. I would be very easily distracted if I listened to anything with actual lyrics, so that's off the table. When I first started writing, I listened to a lot of cello suite, solo cello, solo violin, and that worked pretty well. And then someplace along the way, a Gregorian chant came up, and early in the writing of my memoir, and I understood immediately. It just somehow was a conduit for me into just another realm. And so when I am done with a chapter, I'm done. And then I'm done with 2, and then 3, and then 4 chapters. I do not go back and rewrite once I'm done with them. So I move slowly through them as I put them together. But it's some sort of subconscious thought process. I'm not actively thinking about the writing.
That.
Yeah.
And what about when your editor gets a hold of it? When Josh comes in, does he have suggestions and you say, "I'm done"? No, thank you.
He had no suggestions.
He had none.
Which was lovely. Yes. That was pretty wonderful.
Just felt This is the way it should be.
It is what it is. Yeah.
And how long, this is a question, I'm opening to questions now.
Great.
So anyone who has a question, please ask, because you've got this amazing writing teacher and novelist and memoirist here to answer anything. How long did it take you then to write Beneficence? You said you wrote the memoir quickly.
So I told you that I had those 2 years on that writing grant, and I finished my memoir and sold the memoir, and it went off. It was done in 5 months. And I thought, this is wonderful. I'm going to write another book while I'm on this grant. Matter of fact, I might write 2 more books while I'm on this grant. And then I understood how hard, first I was shifting over to fiction, and I had a very, very difficult time identifying my story. I thought and thought. I opened myself to the ideas of stories. I'm a great reader and read widely, and scoured everything I was reading, everything I was thinking, everything I was hearing, looking for that story. And finally, a man who plowed my driveway. I was living in Pownell, Maine, way, way deep in the woods. I had a half-mile driveway. And a local man who plowed my driveway mentioned to me one day in a snowstorm as he stood by his truck, a story about a man he knew who experienced a great tragedy in his life, and he misbehaved. He made terrible, selfish decisions as a result of it. And I thought, this is my story. I loved that I was going to get to watch somebody who made a mess of that experience and harmed the people he loved because of selfishness and self-absorption. And that's where I started. So now I was probably 2 or 3 years out from my memoir. And now I knew I had my story. And then I had to think and think and think. Finally, you know, I did that thing that we do. I wrote 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 pages and circled and just couldn't find it. And it was when Doris actually showed up and started telling this story that I understood, oh, Top Center is not a selfish and self-absorbed man. He's a human being who was knocked over by this loss and struggled to be a good father and a good husband, and in his own great unmet needs to be embraced and held safe while they went through this terrible time. He made bad decisions, and that once I had that worked out, then I had my book. And I think from then it was 8 or 10 months for me to actually write the book. But it's a long process. Finding a book for me is a very long process.
It's hard because you're committing to at least a year-long process, and oftentimes more.
Yes.
Just as you say, part of it is getting to the story,
yes.
getting to the story,
yes.
and then having.
And it's not what you think it's going to be.
Right. I wondered if you read any books about grieving, or I was actually just thinking of memoirs like Joyce Carol Oates or Joan Didion, or people who've written beautifully about the process of grief. And I wondered if you read any of those.
I had read those, both of the books that you're mentioning, but I don't think that they informed my thinking. I think that it seemed that I was thinking about the experience of that grief in a different way. And I don't think that they actually served, there was no way to really research it. I think more than anything, what we do is make that move. We say, well, the place this story lives is inside, and I'm just going to mine my way to that central place and tell the story from there. Yeah.
One question I had as I was reading was, did you grow up in a rural setting? How did you get those details? So granular details of what it's like to live on a farm. Right.
I wish I could say. It would make me very happy to say, yes, I grew up on a dairy farm in Maine.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful childhood and I loved it. I did not grow up on a dairy farm. I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire, a town that really was not special. My contact at that point was that my sister and I both kept 4-H sheep, which most of our friends and neighbors did not do. We had them in our garage. But when I moved to Maine and married and had children, I made the decision that I wanted my kids to grow up in a homestead environment. So we did then have quite a number of sheep and chickens and big organic gardens, but I had never been on a farm. I had never lived on a farm. I think that that knowledge comes from being in rural Maine. Your neighbors are farmers, and you internalize it. You become very aware of their work and the language, the attachment, the profound attachment to the land, and it becomes so known to you that I think I internalized it. I also would love to have grown up on that center farm. I had the great joy of writing my ideal life. This is the life that I would live. It would be right on that center farm.
Well, do you live a life like that at all now?
I don't. Once my children grew up, I started writing. Things changed, and I no longer kept the sheep and the chickens and the big gardens. And slowly, I moved away from it. I do think, unfortunately, a little late in my life, I'd like to go back to keeping some goats and some chickens.
Well, you've got it all on the page. So what did you learn writing this book, or what surprised you in the process? I know that you've talked about Doris's voice coming in. Was there anything else that kind of, came through that you weren't expecting at all?
That's a great question, Christina. So I would say one thing is that I would not have said that I myself carry such a deep faith in the power of love that we share, and in the strength of the human spirit to go through these, many times in a lifetime. We know grief. Most of us, luckily, don't experience the kind of grief that the centers did, but these are so familiar. And I think that it was a surprise to me to sense how adamant and unshaking my faith in the power of the love that they shared was. As I wrote, it was, and I never lost sight of that. I always understood things in ways that the characters at the time did not understand, that they carried this capacity to find their way back to goodness and wholeness. They questioned God. They were typically New England people, rural people. They went to church on Sundays and had a faith in God and in some of the tenets of Christianity. All of that fell by the wayside for them as they went through this crisis. And, I think that still there is, even with those doubts about, there's really large doubts about our purpose and why, the central question, how could God have let this happen to us? Why would God do this to us? And I think that I was surprised I actually had an answer to that. I felt that the answer was just that the love is here. It is earthly. It's between us now. And that's going to be what carries us.
That is what comes through. And in fact, there's a quote from the book that I want to read. I think it's Tup's perspective. He says, we will ourselves to live this day grateful and unguarded, which again, one of the lessons of this book is about how to stay open when closing feels so much safer, right? We decide. We make ourselves ready to participate in beneficence and goodness. There is no peace outside of that. And that's exactly what you were just saying, isn't it?
Yes. And you write this and then you read it, look at it and say, that's true. I believe that. Yeah.
I believe that. I mean, to me, that's one of the most exciting things about writing fiction is coming to moments. When I wrote Orphan Train, this 91-year-old character says, I believe in ghosts. They're the ones who haunt us, the ones who have left us behind. Yes. And she says later on in that passage, she says, perhaps that's what heaven is, a place in the minds of others where our best selves live on.
Yes. Yes.
And I realized that's what I believe, but I had never articulated it. And
so in the Exiles, Christina, the testimony that you make to that steadfastness of love and loyalty and devotion to goodness, these characters face extraordinary hardship and a brutality of hardship. And yet they come through it. These women, these girls become women who hold on to that, such an unshaking and pure faith in that love and goodness.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is what you express in Beneficence. And I think maybe that was one of the profundities of reading your book, was realizing that I was coming at it from a different way, but kind of expressing the same idea, which is that through profound hardship, we sometimes can reach sort of a depth, if we dwell in it and are willing to wade through it, a depth of we can come through to the other side to something that is even perhaps more meaningful. And that's not always easy to accept.
Yes.
I have two more questions, because I know we have to end at 7:45. Well, I'm on the East Coast, so 7:45. So first of all, this is a reader question. Your writing is so poetic. Do you study poetry as well?
I read poetry. I don't study poetry. It's one of my desires in my future. As these years spool out, I would like to become more serious and study poetry. But I do read poetry. I think that listening to the Gregorian chants creates some of the rhythm of my language on the page. I do see that a friend pointed out to me that there is something, it's almost chant-like in my language a lot of the time. And I think that sort of poetic chant quality comes from writing to those Gregorian chants.
I love this idea. I might try this myself.
Oh, it's incredible.
Maybe all of us who are here right now should try some Gregorian chants and see how it goes. And then my next question, I guess my last question, sadly, this has zipped along so quickly, is what are you working on now, if you can say anything?
I'm on the hunt for a story. So it's one of the things that I've thought of, I never imagined writing a sequel to any book. I have always been a little bit mystified by writers who follow through with another book and maybe even another book. And yet I do feel I was so reluctant to leave this family behind.
You could do a generational shift.
Yes, I thought, or even, this youngest child, Beston, thought of returning to him. He had no voice in this book, and giving him a voice. So that's one of the things that I'm circling.
Oh, I love that idea. That is very generative. I can see, just because also the world is so rich that you've created.
Yes.
So you've got this amazing backdrop for
the
story. Hi, hello.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, Julie.
Like you said, Christina, we could go on and on. This has and it went so quick. I can't believe how quick these 45 minutes went. It went too quick. Meredith, I loved the reading that you did, because holding hands was so much a part of throughout the book.
Yes.
This family held hands. So it was that holding hands was really, I as I was reading the book, it was really struck me that was something, because I don't know whether that was a time period thing. People don't seem to do
Julie,
that anymore.
I've never thought of that, but this family holds hands a lot. They do. I had never thought of it.
Yeah. And sitting on the couch, and there was just lots of different times.
In the truck.
In the truck.
Top always holds one of the kids' hands in the truck. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
It's true.
And so when you brought that into the reading at the wedding,
that's wonderful. That's great. I just discovered something about this book today. Thank you.
That's exciting when your readers and booksellers tell you.
Yeah, exactly. We find those little nuggets in there too. And I'm so, and the other thing that I was in the first part of the book, and I don't know if you're ever going to switch genres, but you create such a wonderful sense of dread and foreshadowing.
Oh yeah.
It was fantastic. Especially in that first part of the book, because the dread was there, but not until the little bit later, but the way that you paced that, it was fantastic. So I don't know if you have a thriller in you or not, but so as we close up here, Christina, the Exiles just came out in paperback.
Yes.
But what are you working on next? And when can we look for something from you next, something new?
I know. Unfortunately, I'm writing another book set in the past, so it involves a ton of research. I was so ready to come to the present day, but the story is too good not to tell. So it's set in Civil War era North Carolina, and it's the story of two sisters who marry two brothers who are Asian, a true story in my family. And that's the least interesting part of the story. So it's a whole interest. It's a big story. It's fun.
Love it. But, so it's probably 2023?
Yeah.
Okay.
2023.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So
I'm nowhere near a book a year person.
Yeah. We always will look forward to it though. We'll keep prodding you. Like we always want a new Christina Baker Kline book. So and if people want to find out more about you, you have a website to direct people to?
Mine is my name, and Meredith, yours is your name too.
And yours, Meredith?
Yes. Yeah. Meredith.hall.
Meredith.hall.
Yeah, it's .org.
.org. Okay. You're a .org.
Is it Meredith hall?
No, I'm sorry. That's
Meredith Hall. That's what I thought.
Meredithhall.org. Meredithhall.org. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks. Yeah.
Well, and Meredith, we need you to get to work too, because we're looking for your next book out.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. That was just really just a wonderful conversation. Yeah. Interesting and provocative for me. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Great conversation. And readers out there, this is a fantastic book club book, and I can't wait. I may it soar to heights. So Meredith, wishing you the best.
Great. Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.